I'm Scott.
I'm Linda.
Pleasure.
Linda Myers.
Scott Harris.
Oh, okay.
No one before.
Yeah. Greetings and welcome. This is Lansing Online News Radio. This is Bonnie Buckaroo, WLNZ, LCC Radio 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. Soon to be joined by my co-host Bill Castanier. Welcome to everybody this evening. Happy to have you here on board. We're going to be talking a lot tonight about books and things and progressive issues. And one of the topics I wanted to get into right away with Bill was I posted something on Lansing Area Now this morning. I'm co-president of the area chapter, so I'll get my biases out there and go transparent immediately. We have this wonderful quote that came in from Todd Aiken. This is a man who probably would not have received a significant amount of attention. Yes, he's going against Claire McCaskill out in Missouri, so that would be an important Senate race. It would get some national attention. But he just took the entire GOP agenda off message again, didn't he?
Well, absolutely. I'm always amazed that there's somebody this stupid out there running for office. Because even if you believe things like that, you don't say them publicly.
What Mr. Aiken did is he was being interviewed, and he's quite vocal about being pro-life, and they were asking him about the exception for rape and incest, and in particular rape. And he said, he went into this little quote about how, well, if it's a legitimate rape, somehow women's bodies produce some sort of magic elixir or juice or something that shuts down the possibility they might get pregnant. And that this is ostensibly in his mind some sort of well-known medical fact. Although he walked it back about as quickly as anybody could the minute that it hit the airwaves. But that was sort of startling.
It was. His poor seventh grade teachers must be crazy. Of course, they may have not taught sex education. They might not have.
In some of the bottom lanes in Missouri, maybe that's the way they
taught. Or they could have been like my school, which was Catholic. Really didn't tell you the truth either.
Yeah. But, I mean, it's forced all the other candidates now. I mean, one of the sort of stealth issues is that, of course, there have been the war on women issues, but they were primarily at the state level. We saw the vagina monologues here at the state capitol this summer. I mean, that was dramatic. So all these states are pushing. The states that have newly elected GOP governors and GOP legislators are pushing pretty heavy on all sorts of fronts with all kinds of anti-abortion legislation. And Michigan is at the forefront of a lot of this, received a lot of attention for what's happening, but had kind of not been part of the presidential debate except in the Rick Santorum era.
But when a U.S. candidate for U.S. Senate, of course,
yes.
He ratcheted it up to the next level, and that was important for women's rights groups, I think.
Oh, I think it's going to be critical.
I know I got like half dozen emails from Debbie Stabenow already.
Oh, I'll bet. Yeah, that's going to be critical in her race, isn't it?
Absolutely. Hoekstra has the identical bill that he supports.
Oh, and Ryan's was one of the supporters of the bill.
Yes.
So now,
it's mixed this all up into a national stew, and that's why I said, how stupid can these people be? It really is amazing.
You know, I mean, it's the kind of thing, though. I mean, how many words have we counted up? Maybe 20?
Yeah.
I hate to think if I were judged on all the words I've ever spoken in my life, there's probably a few batches of 20 that I would truthfully take back if I could.
Yeah, and once you say that now it's viral and you can't take them back, it's over. Doesn't matter how much you ask for forgiveness, it's not coming. So he'll probably withdraw.
Well, there have been pressures for him to do so, but Claire McCaskill doesn't want to do it.
No, please,
she keeps saying,
she keeps sending him notes.
Yeah, she does. She announced today, no, stay in the race. You know, it's your choice to stay in because was he one of the Tea Party types?
I don't recall, but I think he was. Yes.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure, but I'm not sure he was as obvious as some others.
Well, I went to the Capitol last week and sat in the Senate. In the Senate gallery. I'd been on the House side the last time, but this time I was up there in the Senate gallery because there was some suspicion that some of these anti-abortion super bills that were coming through here in Michigan might get voted on last week. And one of the challenges that a lot of women's groups have faced is that some of these bills have such a high sort of creep factor. There's the new one about fetal remains, for example, that you start getting into things like, ew, I don't know that I really want to start thinking about this kind of stuff. What it really would do would put an enormous financial burden on a woman who would have to hire a medical vehicle from a funeral home, to have maybe a thimble full of cells transported, this kind of thing. But it's the kind of thing people really don't like to talk about. So it makes sort of groups squeamish. We're just not clear what's going to happen here in Michigan, but this will renew the debate here.
Oh, absolutely. And this is good for the women's rights activists.
Yeah.
And obviously more liberal and democratic politicians are going to love this. I mean, I'm certain they're in back rooms right now thinking how they can take advantage of this.
Well, there was another headline today. I understand that now there's some question about Bill Schuette's situation with the Attorney General and his participation in the Jace Bolger Roy Schmidt arrangement, that maybe they were colluding, and there's some text messages that they're going to be exploring. And
was it Gongwer first broke that story, and of course that's a proprietary publication, so you can't really see what they said about it. They had some, from what I understand, they had some pretty good details that this one went much deeper than was presented.
What happened, of course, was that Roy Schmidt decided at the last minute to become a Republican after being the incumbent as a Democrat, and he kept that news sort of away from the public as long as possible, so that it would be difficult for the Democrats to put up a viable candidate to take over his seat. And indeed, he was apparently colluding with Jace Bolger to try to pay a young man to run and file as the Democratic candidate. And that was uncovered, and so far it has not led to any kind of criminal charges, but I mean, that may not be the way it ends up.
Again, I keep saying, how stupid can you be?
Yeah.
I mean, didn't they read about Kwame Kilpatrick and his text messaging?
Yes.
You don't do things like, I mean, I'm not saying that we should encourage people to cover up things, but
right.
If you're going to do something wrong, don't do it in text messaging.
Well, and that they pulled this, the state police were investigating this, and
yes.
they were pulled off of it prematurely, so it makes you wonder, too, what else is going on. Again, the cover-up is often worse than the crime.
We're joined by Scott Harris of Everybody Reads Bookstore, and now we're going to bring in as well Linda Myers, and you're with Capital Area Progressives.
That's correct.
Oh, wow, that's a group I'll be honest about it, I hadn't known of it.
Well, we're new. We started last spring, and it evolved out of the Tri-County Democrats, Clinton, Eaton, and Ingham County Democrats, saying we needed to do something to intrigue more people to get interested in what's happening in the economy and where is this country headed and why are we being punished and having to pay the high taxes. And we've got millionaires out there paying less and less all the time. And our economy's in the drain, and how do we bring it out, and how can we get our story across? So we kind of took a nonpartisan name, but claimed to be progressive, and moved from there. And we had a forum last spring, and we held it in the Hannah Center there in East Lansing. And we had about 100 people.
Oh, really? Oh,
it was on a Saturday afternoon.
I always
2
think
to
that
4.
the progressives around here could beat the phone booths.
Well, I had always thought that too, that I was the only Democrat in my neighborhood, but I found out there's a few more. But we thought we had a good crowd, and then we thought, well, we'd take advantage, see if we could schedule early to have a forum with the Supreme Court candidates, because we looked at that as being a hugely important race this fall. And although no one's been nominated yet, or is not official, they have been tagged at a spring convention, and they will get formally nominated in September. So we decided we could get them before September. We'd at least invite people to come in and hear and ask questions and find out what they're all about.
One of the toughest things in the world is to find out to know what to vote on in the judges' races. It's so difficult because
they're nonpartisan races.
They are. And you can look at their backgrounds, but even then, a lot of times their advertising materials don't make it clear what their party affiliation is. Yeah. They're all surprisingly in favor of things like justice. Truth, always a big surprise to me. I think for the candidate that says, I'm basically supported by the crack dealers. I'm not that big on justice.
However, they're all nominated by a political party.
I know.
That's what makes
it is a strange circumstance. And then there's been games where, you might be able to remind me of the most recent time this happened, where they get a name that's easily electable.
Yes.
like a Kavanaugh,
A Kavanaugh's a good one.
Fitzpatrick,
Yeah.
you know,
Kelly.
Kelly.
Oh, yeah.
So that happened the last election, I believe.
Absolutely. And it's going to happen in this election.
Is it?
Absolutely.
They won't be a buckaroo on the Supreme Court. I can guarantee
No.
I'd vote for it.
it. Although I would stand out on the ballot.
It sure would.
But that's true. A lot of it is name
Oh,
recognition.
it is.
I mean, I have actually a lawyer friend in town that I call, my old buddy Stu Schaefer, and I say, who should I vote for? You know, and he said, what do you mean? I don't want to tell you how to vote. And I said, no, do, because I'm completely ignorant. I don't know these people. And I would probably make tragic errors if you don't tell me. Especially when it's coming to things like we're seeing, though, we're just talking about this, you know, the anti-abortion laws that are coming down. I mean, there are just so many legal issues coming down. We're looking now that I think that what's going to happen with emergency manager on the ballot? It's going to make it, I guess, yes?
I think that one's going to make it.
I think it's going to squeak. I think
I do
it is.
too.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about the bargaining law one.
That one does
is
not
it?
look good.
No,
Oh,
it
really?
doesn't.
Oh, I haven't heard the latest on that.
And neither does, well, this is anything to do with politics, but a certain way it is the additional casinos is a little bit suspect too.
Yeah, I didn't think that one. It didn't look like, they looked like recent
Collective
decisions.
bargaining is,
Boy, if that doesn't get there, that would really be unfortunate.
and a lot of it is the crafting of how you craft your petition.
Proposal.
Yeah, the proposal. Yeah.
And there's all the technicalities on top about font size and everything
You
else.
get it down to 125 words, I think it is.
And part of the
Wrong
challenge
about-
too is that if you don't craft it well, people don't really know what they're voting on. I mean, if the first time they see that proposal is when they go into the voting booth.
But the ads against it are already on TV.
Oh, are they?
Oh, yes.
Ah.
They've been running for
I
all
think there's
weekend.
something like $10 million has been spent on proposals that aren't even on the ballot.
Oh, wow. Well, that's such a windfall this year. I mean, the enormous amount of money that's being spent on political campaigns is an incredible windfall for local media.
But don't you think this is because the type of legislation that the state legislature's been dealing with? And for a lot of people, in order to, they either end up in court, we're legislating law through the courts, or we have to do it by petition and get an initiative. And I think it's because of the line and the right-wing approach to legislation right now.
Well, part of it too, I think, is that we do have such a deeply divided country. I think we read the other day that we're looking at maybe 3 to 5% of the overall vote is undecided. That's staggering as far out, really.
And they'll decide the election.
And they will decide the election. That and voter suppression laws, which are.
Well, we've got 2 conventions coming up too very quickly now, and that usually sets some in some place and some in the other. But
Senator Aiken earned himself a nice featured spot.
you think he'll probably lead the convention off?
Well, I think he'd earn
You think
himself a
he'll let
spot on the
him-
Democratic.
Not let him in.
They'd be happy to put him on in prime time, I think. He might do them more damage than anything else. I was amused, though, to see Representative Paul Ryan at the Villages over the weekend. That's an interesting place. That's tens of thousands of retirees all nesting in one place. And from what I hear, it's kind of a giant party in the middle of Florida. I mean, it's one of those, everybody has a condo there, and I know people that are eager to move there. It's sort of giant party central for relatively affluent retirees. Ryan, after his first week on the job there, seems to have to be digging himself out of a hole as well.
Well, you know, this is a segue that's sort of weird, but since it's a party place, it's probably one of the best selling places for 50 Shades of Grey. Now, the reason I bring that up, here's this odd segue.
Yeah.
That book, the trilogy, has been number 1, 2, and 3 for all spring and all summer, except for 1 week,
Right.
which was when Ryan was announced.
You're kidding.
The book that went into number 1 in many, many places around the country is a book called Defending the Free Market, The Moral Case for a Free Economy by Robert Sirico. Now, Robert Sirico is a Catholic priest. This is this guy's book. And this is Ryan's, but I've not seen it
I
written
haven't
about
heard
in any of the
anybody
national
say
media.
anything about it.
I know, but in the Christian Underground blogging, it's there. And the reason I know about it, I was talking to the bookstores.
Well,
And
see,
they went, what the heck is this? After 50
Yeah.
weeks or 40 weeks.
there are these, I just found out I was writing about the fact that Dinesh D'Souza, who had written a book on the rage of Barack Obama, right?
Right.
And I thought, the title always got me because I can't think of a less angry black man than that. I keep talking about Obama cool. If I could only have his cool and his demeanor. But he now has the movie Obama's America 2016. It was going to play for a week at Celebration Cinema. Dinesh D'Souza was given $2.5 million by right-wing donors to be a first-time filmmaker. They think he's going to be the next Michael Moore, but on the right. And it's featuring Reverend Wright and all this kind of stuff. And I just don't think that anybody's going to go there. But they were listing when I did some checking on this. There are movies out there. One documentary that made $7 million that I've never heard of. That it's very big with right-wing audiences. They buy the DVDs. So there's this whole alternative media universe that we don't always hear about.
It's very insular.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wouldn't imagine. Scott here is from Everybody Reads Bookstore. I didn't imagine that D'Souza's book was a big seller for.
No, not a single person has asked about it.
See.
So.
They
It's
had their own
interesting
structure.
is who's the owner of the Detroit Red Wings? Ilitch's son is one of his sons is very much involved in that business, creating documentaries for the Christian right wing.
Oh, really?
Yes. And where they market them is in the big mega churches.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's through the sale of DVDs. They make some serious money.
I have heard that, and the titles that I heard of, I looked at the list of titles, I never heard of any of them.
That amazes me because the Illich family is more on the progressive side.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Except for the son, who probably couldn't make it as a filmmaker.
Even a little over a year ago, when Ann Coulter had come to Central United Methodist Church, which has a fairly progressive message, that no one at the church knew about it. It was so clandestine that that's how they're able to get things across. They are very insular and they're very good at what they do.
Did you know she was here Saturday?
I did not.
I believe she was. I think I saw Facebook messages that she was speaking at Cooley Law School.
Yes, she was.
Is that
I did not know that. I would have gone down to see her.
Me too.
I think that would have been
Pearls of
fun.
wisdom, yeah.
You're
So
listening
that-
to WLNZ, LCC Radio, 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. No, that's very interesting that there is this whole alternative universe. They have their own communication channels. I now get not daily briefings from Glenn Beck's The Blaze, so I can't stay aware of some of this. I like to hear points of view from all over the spectrum. So it's kind of interesting. They have their own set of news stories. And those are the news stories that they cover and that are covered on Fox that might not get picked up by the mainstream media.
And I don't think they care. I think this is the alternative to them is the web, and it's a big move. And actually the pulpit.
Yes. Yeah.
You go in, you hear that from the pulpit. And that there's going to be Ann Coulter appearing at Cooley Law School.
Cooley Law is turning into a sort of intriguing place. When I went to do the video where there were 300 people that packed the Mackinac room up there at the Capitol because they were afraid of Sharia law, and Representative David Agema was there. He's pushing a bill that can't get out of committee yet to prevent Michigan from embracing Sharia law, which last I knew was not a big issue for anybody but this group. And you see that Cooley Law had a featured speaker there. One of their law professors came in, and he said he was doing it not as an affiliate of Cooley Law, but he was a very vocal concern with Sharia law coming to Michigan. It's kind of a surprise to me. I thought our real issue here was kind of jobs. But
Yeah, you raise a good point. Cooley is a private employer. They're private.
Yeah.
They're not a public institution. But a public institution even presents both sides of the issue. But I would have thought a private would have go out of their way to present both sides.
right.
Because they're trying to recruit a national audience. And I don't think they want to be known as liberal or conservative.
Yeah, that's potentially difficult for them.
Especially in the era we're in right now when there's fewer and fewer people going to law school, which was in, I think, the Sunday Lansing State Journal. They're
MSU's still doing well, isn't it?
yeah, MSU is, but the Cooley enrollment is way down.
Yeah.
And that's $38,000 a year times several thousand or more.
They have to be seeing that in the budgets. Ooh, that's a big revenue drop.
It's huge.
Well, that's Bill and I have talked about this in the recent past. I think universities, when we look at the cost of education, I wrote about that first a couple of years ago. and wasn't really on the radar yet about how drastic it is for young people. But this slowdown, this continued slowdown, I saw today that now they're going after the Social Security, up to 15% of your Social Security to pay for your unpaid school debts.
Is
Oh,
that right?
oh,
Wow.
I mean, that's just staggering, the thought that you could still be paying on your school debts when you're collecting Social Security, and that they could take up to 15% of your monthly check.
Wow. That'd be quite a cut.
Oh my gosh,
Oh,
pretty scary.
no, I mean,
Well, you know, the issues we're talking about, that's why the thing that you're doing with the progressives, Linda, to let people learn about individual candidates and what they stand for.
now this event, it's free, the public can
Free to
come.
the public. We encourage everyone.
Where and
And
when?
It's here at LCC in the Science and Arts building in room 170, and it starts at 6:30.
The date on that is
Sunday, August 26th.
Sunday, August 26th.
This coming Sunday.
This coming Sunday.
It's coming
All right.
Sunday, and we plan for it to go from 6:30 to 8. And I'm sure they'll stick around and ask questions if the questions don't get answered. But we have.
Did you get all of them to commit?
Yes, we did. So we have Sheila Johnson, Judge Sheila Johnson from Detroit,
Okay.
Honorable Judge Connie Marie Kelly, we note the name Kelly, and then Bridget Mary McCormick, who is a U of M law
That's another good name.
professor.
All those Irish names on the ballot. That's
Right.
amazing.
And so those three will be nominated at the Democratic State Convention, the 9th of September, I believe.
And the audience will have a chance to pose some questions too,
Yes,
maybe?
they will. We will have some prepared questions for them.
Okay.
And once we get through those, we'll open it up to the audience. But we wanted them to feel comfortable and have some questions that they got ahead of time and be able to answer.
Mm-hmm.
Dumb questions. How many, are there any open seats or are all incumbents?
There's one incumbent for a part-time or partial term, I believe. Sahara was appointed because I can't remember who left. Yeah. And then Markham's seat is up. So, and Justice Kelly, Marilyn Jean Kelly, she can't run again. She hit that magic age where she can't run.
Oh, okay. So there is an open seat.
So there is an open seat.
Interesting.
Two open
Two
seats.
open seats.
Well, 2 seats that are up. One's open, one's got an incumbent, and then the partial term.
Well, Michigan is a state where we have really, in essence, one-party rule. We have, the GOP has the majority on the state Supreme Court, and the, both houses of the legislature,
Right.
and the governor's office, and the attorney general, and
Actually, they have an extra vote on the court right now. It's 5-4.
So there's only 2 open seats, or 3, because there's 3 candidates.
Yeah, there's 3 seats.
Okay.
One is totally open because
and then
Kelly
2. Who's the other incumbent?
Markham.
Markham. Okay.
Okay.
Markham.
And where is Markham from?
I can't tell you.
I'm guessing the metro area, but I'm not sure.
Markham is a popular name in my neighborhood because Randy Markham owned the Sunoco station for all those years. And quite honestly,
Mason.
Big oil.
I have to tell you the story, and it's totally inappropriate, but they have a family plot in the cemetery that I live near. And I go over there all the time, and I look at the headstone that they have, and it's Markham's, right? And it says, "You can always tell a Markham, but you can't tell them much." I have rarely seen jokes on headstones. I mean, but I just thought that was really
Yeah,
clever. I mean, that shows
Tells you a
you
little something about the family, doesn't
It does,
it?
doesn't
You know,
it? Yeah.
the Historical Society of Greater Lansing, we had a cemetery tour this Sunday. There was about 85 people there.
I
There's
wanted
a
to go
lot.
to that.
It is. They are fun. They are
Let's go
fun,
to a cemetery and have fun.
and they're historically interesting because that's how you can tell your history in Lansing. And this was about most of the graves that were visited were mid 50s, 1950s.
Okay, I saw that in the paper. They were having that. I
They're
wondered
very,
what it was like.
very interesting because it tells the story of Lansing's growth, the entrepreneurship here. Now, we didn't see any of those funny ones though. Now, we did see a stone that was put up by Jim Perkins, who used to teach here. He's retired from who taught architecture here. And he has put his stone up early. And there's no family members buried there. There's a gorgeous Frank Lloyd Wright looking black piece of onyx or something.
Wow.
It's gorgeous. But he came and stood beside it.
Oh, he did.
What you were saying is a lot better than standing under it.
Oh, I'll bet. Oh,
Yeah,
that's clever.
It was kind of neat. I mean, I didn't know that was going to happen. It was interesting to see the history of Lansing and how it developed through grave sites.
I know that's an odd perspective,
is
but that's very
interesting.
clever.
Mm.
Yeah.
And you can do it, I think, in any community. If you go and then study who's buried there,
Yeah.
which takes an immense amount of work, by the way.
Mhm.
One of the things I learned, I think I knew, but it was reinforced, is it's difficult to research the history of women of that era.
Because of their married names, children.
Married names, and they also weren't considered important.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't hold important jobs. They didn't get any newspaper articles.
Oh, I
So
see.
it's really difficult to do that research. You often come to a dead end there, and it's
Not as many documents.
right. So there's a lot of things that were kind of interesting to learn,
Hmm.
and we do those every year. So I'd really encourage people to look for one next year.
Well, one of the other things I meant to ask you about, because we're always good at the local events, is that the one book, one community read is coming up. And what's happening on that this year?
Well, what's interesting about it is when I first heard the choice of the book, I wasn't really convinced that. I thought it was another one of these boy grows up in slum, becomes wealthy, or gets out of great.
Horatio Alger?
Yes, because they've had too many of those.
Oh, have they?
Yeah, if I had a stereotype, I'd say that was the one problem with it. They've had great ones too, but the Golly Gee stories are getting a bit much.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this book, and I'm looking for the title, but it's by Catherine Boo, B-O-O.
Yes.
And it's beautiful. I'm going to look as I talk. But anyway, it's about an Indian slum in Mumbai.
Yes.
And she is a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist from the Washington Post. She works for the New Yorker magazine now. She lives in London now. She married an Indian. And she decided to visit a slum. And they tried to put something over on her, basically. They tried to show how the women were coming out of these slums and becoming entrepreneurs. She just had an instinctual sort of belief this was not true, was not happening. So she got interpreters and she went back. She went back for 3 years, sometimes 10, 12 hours a day. And she's written this exposition. It's a documentary journalism about what this one slum in Mumbai is like. Houses 3,000 people. As you can imagine, it is horrific.
Oh, yeah.
And she does not pull any punches. I mean, she opens up with a self-immolation suicide.
Oh.
I mean, and it doesn't go up from there. It goes down.
Whoa.
It gets much worse.
This is not an inspirational.
No, it's not inspirational. It's pretty scary. And I wrote a story for Parent Pulse on Wednesday, and I think in the lead, if it doesn't change, I talked about students are going to be moving in this weekend, and they're going to be moving in their laptops and their large screen, flat screens, and all the things that refrigerators. And I'm wondering if they're going to get the feel about this incredible difference, because that's really what she wants to point out. I mean, this Catherine Boo, which I encourage everyone to go listen to, I think she's going to be pretty interesting, is she's trying to point out what happens when you concentrate money in the hands of a few.
It's the 1%. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Without saying it, that's her story, and she knows it. I mean, and it's happening globally, not just there. It's happening all over the world, and she wants to point that out to the kids. That
this transfer of wealth upward.
This stuff is going on around you, and you better get it.
It doesn't trickle down in India either.
I know.
Only if you live on a garbage dump. Which, I mean, this is one of the typical garbage dumps they live in. That's how they make their living, is extracting things that can be recycled. They trap frogs and rats in the polluted lake at the end of it. It is
grim.
Very grim. It's as grim as anything most people will ever read.
As bad as Slumdog.
Oh, see, Slumdog, she calls that well, she says in Indian parlance, that's called from zero to a hero.
Yeah.
That's called poverty porn.
Yeah.
She does not like that, and this book is not at all like that. And the interesting thing she did, you'll appreciate this, Bonnie, she videotapes all her interviews herself.
Oh, does she?
And for fact checking.
Yeah, that's
accuracy, which is beautiful.
It is.
But the ebook gave her the opportunity to include clips of some of those interviews.
Wonderful.
I thought,
wow.
It's so obvious. Why not do it, right? And that's what our publisher did. So I'm going to be interested to find out how many students read it on an ebook. like I do.
I wonder too. I mean, you wouldn't see it on a Kindle, would you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Or would you? Could you still see the video clip? I didn't know if it
Sure.
would play. I haven't had an ebook yet on a Kindle that has a clip in it, so I didn't know that they would.
Well, let me tell you the title of the book. It's Behind the Beautiful Flowers, and the title is taken from a sign that is basically obscures it. It's a big, big sign, and it obscures the slum, and it's for a tile, a type of floor tile that lasts forever.
Oh.
And they are really in sort of maybe a few hundred yards from the international airport.
Oh.
That's how close they are to the airport. So that's one of the first things people see when they come in from out of country is this slum.
You're listening to WLNZ, Lansing LCC Radio here in Lansing. What else do I have to say? 89.7. I forget the call numbers. Talking about that, I think one of the things that I'm always struck by is that we do live in this media-saturated world. I'm getting ready to start my class again next week, World of Media, looking at an overview of the media. And I realize these young people that come in as freshmen have been saturated with so much media telling them bye, bye, bye. You were defined by the tag on your jeans and the watch that you wear and whether you have the iPod or whether you have a knockoff, that kind of thing. And you know, it's not their fault that they have just been so overwhelmed by all of this. Maybe the one book, one read is a bit of an antidote to that.
This one is. I think it is. There's a committee that selects it every year. This was a very good selection. The woman, Catherine, in her book has never been chosen for a community read. Well, it just came out this year. It just came out in like April, I think. Mm-hmm. So she's going to become popular.
Well, you were talking about videoing interviews and one book, one community, one book. Yeah, you know where I'm headed.
Oh, do I know where you're going?
A student of mine wanted to do a documentary at one point, and she wanted to talk about wearing the hijab. She's an Arabic major. She wants to be a reporter in the Middle East, and she was going to go over to Morocco. And we found out that coming into Lansing, East Lansing, for the one book, one community read was going to be Zaytun by Dave Eggers. And Kathy Zaytun was going to be available, she and her husband, and they were going to be the featured speakers for that. And we thought there's a perfect opportunity for Karen to get one of her interviews done. So I agreed to follow along with the video camera so that she could interview Kathy on video. It's up on YouTube. If you search for Kathy Zaytun and hijab, you're going to find Karen's interview with her. And she was such a charming woman, very friendly, effusive. I think she won over the audience. The book was about what happened to her husband. He was more taciturn. He didn't say that much. He was not as comfortable public speaker. But Dave Eggers talked about how he had been out rescuing people in his motorboat when the police picked him up and put him in the bus station, which was being used as a sort of informal prison. And because he was a Muslim and there was concerns about terrorism, somehow he ended up being held there as a prisoner for a few days, even though what he was trying to do was save people. And it was quite an insightful book about all the challenges that Muslim Americans face in our culture since 9/11. And you can go now and Bill and tell me, what is the punchline that has occurred since then?
It's a bad punchline. Just recently, it had been leaking out around the web, so it made the mainstream news. Mr. Zaytun had been divorced from his spouse, Kathy. Part of the reason was for domestic violence. He was beating her regularly. But what he's in jail for now, awaiting trial, is he put out a $20,000 hit on her life.
Yes.
So this whole story falls apart, really, at some point.
He had accosted her on the street with a tire iron after they were divorced, because he did not believe that she had the right to see other people or in essence, go on with a new life. And when he was put into jail, he tried to hire a fellow inmate, apparently, or allegedly. I mean, sometimes people are seeking good deals for themselves, so they make up stories, and we can't say for sure that it's automatically, it's not been proven in a court of law yet. But it's a terrible story, especially since he had been made really a hero.
Oh, he was a hero nationally. But Dave Eggers, in his book Zaytun, has got an art drawing of Mr. Zaytun in his canoe.
Yeah.
It was a big deal. I'd love to talk to Dave about it. And I'm going to look and see if he's done any interviews about it.
Well, you had interviewed him.
I did. And I interviewed Kathy and her husband.
Yeah. And what did you think?
Almost the same that you did. He was not very forthcoming. Kathy controlled the conversation. She She was great at what she did.
She was a perfect PR person.
She was a perfect PR person. She was college educated.
Yeah.
And she told the story for both of them, really.
Yeah. Just a shattering story, but it's another reminder to me, and I think it's really sort of a reminder. This idea that I think we have a stereotypical vision of who the domestic violence victim is. And Kathy Zaitoon would not have been at the top of my list with it. I mean, she did not have the look of somebody who was being regularly beaten. She did not look fearful. She seemed to be genuinely affectionate towards her husband. I really didn't see that coming. I thought there was something a little bit too pat about the story, that it maybe was too well rehearsed, and I was a little put off by that. But I had not anticipated.
That was the only thing that bothered me, but you have to take it at face value. I mean, I wasn't about to accuse Dave of maybe whitewashing over some of the things he might have seen. It just didn't feel quite right to me. And that's all I can say. I've had a lot of books like that. Several of them actually have been One Community books. The story wasn't quite right that they were telling. There was something a little bit off in an interview, and a lot of times, in the kind of interviews I do, I can't go after them.
Right.
We're not 60 Minutes.
No.
Right.
But you know something they just said isn't absolutely the truth.
It rings false.
Yes, it rings very false sometimes. And
that's a real challenge. I mean, and I think it's a challenge for the author who is trying to cover real life rather than write fiction. Because so many times, when you're the person out there, because I have done those stories, and you want to, and they tell you this wonderful story, it's a great human interest story, but what if it's not really that way? And how much of a creep are you to sort of go and say, did they really do that? And then you look like you're just this cynical, hard-bitten, awful person.
And of course, in interviews, they cover up some things that they don't want you to ask about, or they're totally off limits.
Yeah.
I mean, there was one author, I could not talk about her relationship with sort of a benefactor, which led to the divorce with her husband. That was like off limits.
Yes, yeah.
It was very important, central to sort of this book, this memoir. Another memoir, Patti Smith's, who was friends with Mapplethorpe, her memoir. I just found another biography about her that's pretty obscure.
Yeah.
It's paperback, and boy, the stories are totally different.
Really?
Yeah, and I'm going to try to ask someone, which one's closer to the truth? I mean, for example, how she met Mapplethorpe. The stories are totally different.
That's interesting.
I would remember how I met him.
I would think so.
Yeah.
I would think so. Although you wonder which version
I'm curious.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Hers made her look better.
Oh.
See, it's a memoir.
Yeah.
But as Erica Jong said, one thing you can't do in a memoir is lie.
Well, yeah. We had a little example of, it brings Fareed Zakaria to mind. Fareed Zakaria is going to be ending his suspension for plagiarism, and it is the mighty have fallen in a lot of cases. Things aren't quite as they seem. And when you hear the excuse that, my notes got confused, I don't know quite how your notes get confused.
Well, even Greg Mortensen, that was another case where he had
a cup of tea.
There's no reason for him to have embellished. He didn't need to embellish his story, but he somehow did. And
you wonder if any memoir is true.
Yeah.
Don't you think the internet has caused some of that with Wikipedia changing? You can't rely on Wikipedia being correct because you
or being the same 10 minutes later.
Yeah, what they say is that once Ryan was announced as the running mate, his biography changed every 10 minutes.
Yes,
that day.
So they laughed at finally.
Yeah.
The only way I use the Wikipedia is to go click on the links at the bottom to go back to the original sources because they're the only ones that you can count on. Yeah.
Sometimes you can't count on the spelling.
That's
true. You really can't count on Wikipedia. It just gives you a picture.
It does.
And some ideas, but you can't use it for any sources, really.
Well, before I forget, Bill, as we're on the topic of books here, and it's perfect with Scott Harris here because everybody reads, that's what we're talking about here is a community bookstore. I mean, this is a place that you designed this as a hub for people to be able to come, get good books, have good conversation. You're right next to the Gone Wired Cafe, so people can wander over and now even have a drink. Yeah. Wow. So that's a whole new era for them.
And for us.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about what's happening at the bookstore these days.
Well, the biggest thing right now is we just completed our contest, writing contest that we co-sponsored with Writing at the Ledges at Grand Ledge Writers Group. We had 60 individuals put in or 60 different contributions, I
This
should
was
say,
stunning.
and which was again beyond what we had anticipated. Short stories limited to 1,111 words, with somehow weaving an independent bookstore into the story. And some of the stories were sensational, and I was very pleasantly surprised. I had no idea what to expect. On September 15th, we're going to be having a party to announce the winners and to celebrate all the entrants.
What's the date?
It's Saturday, September 15th.
Okay.
It's going to be at the bookstore, Everybody Reads, which is 2019 East Michigan Avenue on the east side of Lansing. It's going to start at 7 o'clock, and it'll probably go at least until 9. It'll be a potluck. So we're going to have it. Yeah, so if you want to bring stuff in, hey, cool. And it's just going to really embody what the store is about. Not only does it bring the community together, but half of the proceeds, or half the entrance fee, is going to the Capital Area Literacy Coalition.
That's wonderful.
So,
Yeah.
This is one of the best promotions I've ever heard of. And I had that same feeling. I figured if you got 20, I thought, wow, that's a tremendous success.
See,
I mean, because this is work
I'm
to
twice
write a
as
short
cynical
story.
as Bill, I had
Yeah.
said 10.
oh,
It takes 1,100 words. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it is not easy to make a good story.
No.
And it had to be original because of the squirrely way they designed the contest. You just couldn't pull something off the shelf and send it to them.
Although
It had
I
to be
don't
about
know.
an independent
I
bookstore.
have faith that Fareed could have found
he's a professional.
The tale of the independent bookstore.
Mhm. And so, who are the judges, and what criteria
Well,
did they use?
Sure. We looked at originality. We looked at quality of writing. We
Okay.
tried not to put too much of the onus on the author to be perfect when it came to the spelling and to syntax and all. But
Okay.
grammar was important, and credibility. Rosalie, and I cannot pronounce her last
Petruski.
name. Thank you.
From here from LCC.
Right. We've had her on the show several times. She's great.
And Randy Pearson also.
Yep.
Oh, wonderful.
from
Been there too.
LCC. And the three of us were the first round, and John Schneider from
Oh, was he?
Lansing
Oh,
State
that's
Journal
great.
is going to be the final judge. He's got the final 15 entries, and we don't know who's won yet.
Oh, you
Oh,
don't?
you don't? Oh, I thought
So
you were
it's
going to
still a
go.
mystery to you too.
To me as well, yeah.
So you think you might get most of the authors to come?
We're hoping that we'll have a good number of them.
I'll
at least,
bet.
So
Not bad.
This is going to be a fun event. It should be.
it absolutely will be.
These are the kinds of things
I
that
love your
I just think
bookstore.
are wonderful.
I really do.
And I love your cause.
Yeah. You sold books at our first one.
Mhm.
Yeah.
As an unabashed liberal.
Right.
May I say that, or is that work over?
Oh, I don't know. Don't they take you out now?
Bash?
Don't
say that.
Well, you raised an interesting point here, though, and I do have to ask this question. You just self-identified as a liberal.
Mhm.
You have used the word progressive. I think that's because the word liberal got demonized so badly.
Like your pockets.
But
A
you know-
10-year campaign to make everybody think liberal was some sort of creep that.
My husband keeps telling me I shouldn't use progressive. You see, relates progressive back to the Communist Party history.
That always made me fond of it.
Hitler was a progressive, and I said, well, in that day, it probably had a different connotation, but I'm here to represent the 99%.
Right. Like
Right.
how Abraham Lincoln was a Republican.
Yeah.
George Romney, I
Yeah.
guess, was a Republican too, but you wouldn't know it from his son.
I know. I mean, they don't. It's sort of
They
like
would
musical
identify
chairs.
as Democrats.
Every
Right.
few decades, they get up and they switch chairs and they
Uh-huh.
switch names and all
Right.
that kind of thing. And it gets without a scorecard, you don't. I mean, I remember the days when you could actually say that they were profligate spenders. The liberals were pretty much, hey,
Mhm.
yeah, let's raise taxes on rich people and
Mhm.
spend a lot of money on neat stuff, you know.
Mhm.
And you can't even say that anymore.
No, and that's why, again, I guess I do call myself a liberal, is to take ownership of the word.
That's
Mhm.
wonderful.
Don't
Yeah.
let others define us.
I'm happy to have 2 words.
So.
Yeah.
Left wing?
Oh, well, there's that.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a couple of communist grandmothers. I mean, they came over from Russia to get away from the revolution, and when they got here, they said, "Wait a minute," changed their minds. You know,
Yeah, absolutely.
the 30s were an interesting era. So yeah, that's that. My father, who worked at a steel improvement in Forge in Cleveland during World War II, they were making bomb parts. And his concern was that we wondered which one of the grandmothers was going to show up on the FBI because they wanted to vet all the management people at the shop that they were building bomb stuff. And they said, we're going to get your back. And I said, I'm going to be out of a job tomorrow. Once they get a hold of my mother, that's it. It's all over. They never found out. So yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
There's a new book out on domestic spying that I'll talk about next week. I'll bring the title. But it focuses on the Berkeley free speech movement.
Oh, Mario Savio.
The whole, and then the California experience with domestic spying. Well, maybe go to my library and dig out my book on Michigan spying and a couple articles.
Is there a book on it?
There's a book and a couple articles. The article actually is much better about how Michigan State Police was founded to spy on citizenry.
Really?
It's the only domestic police force that was founded for that sole purpose at the time.
It was founded for that
Yes,
purpose?
yes. We've got quite, well, you know, you've heard certainly the Red Files, and
Yeah.
and so it delves into all that and what was done in domestic spying.
Wow.
It was amazing. The city of Detroit was the best anywhere at domestic spying. They really were.
It was sort of a dubious distinction, but
Yeah.
they were really
Yeah.
good at it.
Yeah, very good at it. So, and that's kind of the era that the mayor of Detroit came out, Coleman Young, and that's why one of the reasons he was so liberal.
Yeah. Well, one of the other bits of news that really I think we would be remiss not to mention is the speech yesterday that Julian Assange made from the window of the Ecuadorian embassy, where he is currently. He's been granted asylum. Now, whether he'll ever get out of London is another question. I think that's actually, I don't think it speaks well of the Brits to talk about storming the embassy, because I certainly think they'd be putting all of their people worldwide in serious jeopardy by even suggesting such
They
a
should
thing.
never use that word.
No. So, but I was very surprised. You know, I guess it surprises me in this era that there's not more discussion of Julian Assange. I don't see him discussed much. I mean, over coffee or in classes or on campus. And it would seem that the journalism organizations should take a stand on that sort of thing.
It'll be interesting to see what your students say, because I know you'll be asking them about it when they come back.
I know. And they'll say, Julian who? Because he's not that well.
He's in the Bourne identity, isn't he? Or the new Bourne identity?
Yeah, that's where it is, yeah. You're listening to WLNZ, LCC Radio, 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. Bill, before we leave the topic of what's coming up at various bookstores, though, there is the big event. You had mentioned it earlier, the book 50 Shades of Grey. It's hard not to mention it when it was. You told me the other day the statistic, 20 million books in 6 months?
Oh, yes. Minimum. It's 40 to 50 million worldwide.
Whoa.
Half of them are about ebooks. It's going about 50-50. It's 1 out of 3 of every book sold.
1 out of 3 of every book sold?
Yeah, it was 1 out of 5 for a while, but right now, to me, that number doesn't make sense. However, these are Nielsen reports now. They're not making this stuff up like they used to, because they did.
Yeah.
I mean, they used to make it up, frankly. These are real numbers, so they might be on the low side, if anything.
I'm staggered by that.
The ADA numbers are consistent with that.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
I couldn't have predicted this if I tried, but you and I have talked about it. It's sort of a perfect storm in the literary world because of the ebook. I mean, people can now read it in private. You don't know what they're reading.
Right.
But I've talked to several of the people that are on the panel at Schuer's Books Wednesday at 7 p.m. They're going to discuss this. There's this person that specializes in sex therapy, a philosopher, a woman who writes erotic romances. She's written 15 of them. She's from Grosse Pointe, Michigan.
And sure wishes she'd written this one.
Everyone wishes they would have written this, even as poorly as it is written. And then the fourth person is an actual practitioner. And as I've talked to them,
Dominatrix?
I didn't ask her if she was the dominatrix or the submissive. I think she was the submissive.
Really?
Yes, I do.
That's a tougher role.
I'm not trying to make any judgments about it anymore. I've learned so much about it that. And one of the things I learned is, other than it was bad writing about sex, some of the things that are done in that book can be very dangerous.
Oh.
So a couple of the
don't use it as a how-to.
Right. Don't try this at home. A couple of the panelists.
However, trying it on the street might be a challenge.
A couple of the panelists suggested that you read more books about BDSM before trying, because this is not a primer for it at all. It does say that sex sells, I think. But anyway.
But maybe that when I hear now 1 out of every 3 books sold, that's more than just sex sells, because I know how well things like Joy of Sex sold. But no, now you've actually staggered me.
See, it's a popular culture thing, and what happened was, because it was read in private for a while, people started talking about it. The sex therapist told me that gave people the sanction to talk about it publicly. And as they started talking about it publicly, it started to come to the front of the bookstores. It's in the front of every bookstore Not every bookstore, but most bookstores.
Zondervan, probably not.
Zondervan's not. It is also not anywhere to be seen in a Walmart. It is in Sam's. It's not anywhere to be seen in a Meijer.
Oh,
and both of them invoke family values, which I can understand.
Yeah.
Except they sell the Dragon Tattoo series.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't think there was one thing in there that had anything to do with family values.
I don't think so.
I
either.
don't think so.
That was a very rugged book.
I may not be.
I thought it was intriguing.
Yeah, oh, it's good. It's
Yeah,
good book.
it's a very good
It was
book.
a tough.
Yes.
But I stopped after book one. I said
I
don't
didn't
really
like
want
it.
to
It got
do
a little bit complex. It's overly complex.
I had to know what it was about, but I didn't want to know anymore. Yeah. I'm not that. I try not to be that vengeful.
You know, the irony to me is we are unabashedly an inclusive bookstore.
Yes.
By default, people look at us as if we're a lefty or a progressive bookstore.
Mhm.
But we've made it a point not to exploit this because we are family friendly.
Oh,
Having said that,
okay.
it's for all permutations and all constructs of families, not just what one perceives as
Sure.
traditional nuclear family. And it's funny because, again, we want our store to be, if you will, a sanctuary for someone, regardless, irrespective of their experience and background. And again, it just seems, I don't know, it just seems cheap right now. You know, when you hear how the internet is predominantly, not for estimates, in excess of 50% of the sites visited are pornographic sites, it just seems to play into the lowest common denominator.
It is tawdry. And it's a public tawdry sort of.
Yeah.
It really is tawdry. And if you read it, it's even more tawdry. Because it is so
I've not read it. I just can't bring
I
myself.
wouldn't recommend anyone read it.
Really?
It's
I haven't
so
read it.
poorly written.
Yeah.
The sexual experiments in it are not exciting. I mean, it's boring.
Read an AS News then or something.
Oh yeah, and that's one of the things. That's one
Now,
of the
would you
things.
carry that book?
Yes.
Oh, you do.
Yeah,
So
it's well written.
so you're talking about the literary quality rather than the subject matter.
Part and parcel. I mean, we don't discriminate exclusively based upon something coming across as being pornographic. But to me, 50 Shades of Grey has no literary merit. It's just yuck.
Well, I mean, you go all the way back to the Adventures of Fanny Hill and the Diaries of Frank Harris and all of those books from
Young
the Tropic of
Chatterley's
Lady Chatterley's Lover.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there were all the Grove books really that were banned. Starting in the 1920s when erotica was starting to become more mainstream and bookstores were.
And I had to read Lady Chatterley's Lover several times to find anything erotic in it. I mean, it's not that erotic of a book.
Yes.
I mean,
that's true.
it's very somewhat subtle.
Right.
Yes.
And you kind of think, why was that banned?
Yeah. I keep thinking about someone from that era showing up now and then handing them one of these books. I mean, I think that their eyes would just bug open.
I bet so.
I look at, I even look at today. Lisa Bloom is, she's the daughter. Who's the Gloria Allred's daughter? And she was on a talk show a few weeks ago, and she was talking about the fact that, when she showed up to talk about a serious topic, they teased her hair. They pulled down the front of her blouse to show some cleavage. They overly made her up. I mean, even the news shows are turning women into these, sexual beings, and that's how they're being rated. And it's really kind of worrisome. There's a movie called Misrepresentation, it's quite a good movie, and we showed that on campus. So trying to raise young women's awareness of the fact that sort of the hypersexualization that's going on in the culture is really it's kind of worrisome.
I never really got an answer to a good answer anyway. One I thought was a good answer to the basic question I asked everyone I kind of ran into was, why do women want to read this book?
Right.
Where they are very submissive. She's very submissive. Now, in the end, I might give it away, but there's 3 series. There's a trilogy. She becomes the dominant. But most people aren't that far yet. They don't know where it's going. They're only
Spoiler
number
alert.
1, Yeah.
Do you think that will stop them from reading it? Doesn't sound like it.
I don't think so. They seem to be moving right through them.
A young woman I talked to viewed them as very romantic. And I don't know why that. I mean, that's kind of worrisome too, isn't it? Why would
that would be the most worrisome thing.
Yeah.
There's no romance in this book. Maybe I grew up wrong, and I'm not. I'm not prudish.
No.
There's something about this book is so wrong to me.
I love the fact that we have 4 relatively progressive and inclusive people here who are kind of outraged and coming across as though we're puritanical because of the sexual content.
That's the danger,
irony
isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the submissiveness that worries me.
Right. No, it's the exploitation.
Exploitation.
Yeah.
I'm anxious to go to that event, and I'm wondering how many people are really going to show up.
As a domestic violence victim myself in my early years, I really don't like the idea of getting beaten up. So I tend to avoid books that
Even for
include
fun.
that as a theme and
Yes,
turn it into
yeah.
entertainment. Although I was surprised the other day, Rihanna apparently has been interviewed by Oprah and said that she doesn't stay in contact with Chris Brown anymore, but that she had concern for him. And this was posted in The Guardian, and people lit into her like no tomorrow. And I had to post there, and I had to say, I've actually worked with homicide victim families who have come to the conclusion that it is in their best interest to forgive the killer who killed their family member. And for them to be able to do that, they felt was for them to be able to move on. And then I thought it was really unfortunate that every single commenter was telling Rihanna that basically she was being an evil person. And I thought to myself, what is the standard now? Does that mean that he's never supposed to have a date again in his life? Every woman in the world is under some sort of moral obligation to never spit on him on the street. Is that the only appropriate? So, I don't know how we reclaim people. I'm a little bit confused by some of this. We do have a puritanical side. We have to be careful that we're not just dismissing this just because of its sexual content, but it's that.
Well, it lowers the threshold.
Yeah.
It is so poorly written. The sex scenes are so poorly written. You can pick up almost any sort of advanced mystery book, and they're better written.
Well, you had talked earlier. we come out of the era where Terry Southern wrote Candy.
My favorite book, almost. I'm not it's strange to admit that.
It's a hilarious book. It's one of the wittiest books I've ever read.
And it was a satire of Candide.
Yeah,
He wrote it as a ripoff,
exactly.
so fan fiction ripoff.
Yeah.
But Terry Southern could write.
Well, that's the
Now,
difference.
the one thing I want to defend the woman that wrote this book, E.L. James. She did not write this book with the intent that it would become this. She wrote it as fan fiction, as a knockoff of the Twilight series. That's all she ever wanted to do because it was fun for her. In that context, it's great. It's fun. It's a satire.
Wow.
But
I don't think people are reading it as satire.
No,
think so either.
most people have lost that. Totally lost it.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, hardly anybody knows it. 20 million a year.
It's just one of those American phenomena that occurs every once in a while. And it just kind of makes your jaw drop, and you don't know quite what it means, but it sounds like a watershed moment.
Well, I think it's a watershed moment in publishing. I think they looked at it seriously. And now there's all kinds of new ones coming out. In fact, there's, I think, number 4, 5 on the bestsellers list is another S&M book.
No, really?
Yeah, now it's down around maybe.
So the vampires are out now.
Unless they're into S&M. No,
Well,
man.
Teeth in the Neck is probably a little bit on the
See, that was the spin she took, kind of, in a way. There's pain in that. And
I must say, one of the fun night that I had in New York City many, many years ago was watching Frank Langella play Dracula on Broadway with those sets done by Edward Gurry. It was just beautiful.
that would have been something to see
It
every
was
night.
wonderful.
Wouldn't those sets be worth a fortune?
Oh,
They were utterly amazing. And it was done it was a very witty performance, and clearly the sexual undertones, and Langella was so wonderful. He was swashbuckling. It was just great to see.
Well, if you want to read less than pornography but very salacious and sensual, is Anne Rice.
Yes.
right.
Well, hello.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
But
writing.
that's good writing.
That
Oh
is
yeah,
good
she
writing.
can write.
Yeah.
She's a
And
good
again,
writer.
this woman never set out for this to become a phenomenon. She wrote it for herself, basically, and a few thousand fans online on these fan fiction sites.
Well, fan fiction is another interesting phenomenon that has occurred. In your store, do you carry any of the fan fiction on anything?
Not very much.
I wouldn't think so.
We're a different type of bookstore.
Yeah, it's a whole different genre.
Yeah.
There are rack after rack of Star Trek fan novels and that kind of thing. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Sherlock Holmes. I mean,
Sherlock Holmes. Yeah.
it's also called prestige.
Prestige,
That's
yeah.
typically what the collectors call it.
Where's the line? There were people who wanted to take the Gone with the Wind story and update it, but they had to they would run into copyright trouble because of the state of Margaret Mitchell. So they were finally given, some authors were given authorized opportunities to write sequels. But where's fan fiction fall in there?
That is a darn good question.
Yeah.
It is so gray that it's still being litigated because
Oh,
there was
it is.
one popular book that was based on Gone with the Wind. It was banned. I mean, it was
Take
said
it right
copyright
out,
violation. So I've been wondering about that, how this fan fiction can get by it, and why they don't get on their case.
I guess it depends on whether the people who have the original decide to
It is.
make
It is. And
available.
one of the things I think, if it's creating some buzz for their book,
Yeah.
it's okay. Why wouldn't I let it?
Scott, what are the popular genres in your bookstore? What do people come there for?
Sure. We try to have, well, peace and social justice is probably a cornerstone of the bookstore. We have a lot of LGBT books, fiction as well as nonfiction, books of different nationalities, especially for children, to talk about universal world experience as well as experiences that are unique.
Oh.
Environmental books, vegetarian, vegan books too. So,
Yeah.
and we also have a pretty large section for local authors and Michigan books as well. So what we do is we try to find areas that we consider to be underserved or underrepresented.
When I walk through the bookstore, I often see what I view as some of my old friends on your shelves.
I
So
love it.
yes. Well, thank you very much. It was wonderful to have Linda Myers here talking about. Now, give us the date again.
August 26th from 6:30 to 8 p.m.
And that's going to be at
the Arts and Science Building here on the LCC downtown campus, room 170.
And you'll get to meet your U.S. Supreme Court nominees. And tune in next month.
State.
So, yeah, I just elevated them a bit.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And tune in next week for Lansing Online News Radio with Bonnie and Bill, WLNZ LCC Radio here at 89.7 in Lansing, Michigan.